Hey guys, thanks so much for coming. My name is Alyssa Marshall. Uh, so just to make sure that you guys can see me and hear me okay, could you please, please, please be so kind to let me know inside the chat room? That would be much appreciated. Otherwise, let's square out the tech first. One FYI housekeeping thing before we get into it is I'm kind of always going to be speaking for the future, if that makes sense. There's going to be about a 15-second or so delay between when I talk and when it actually reaches you. So that's important to know. Another thing is I will be going through as many questions from your end as possible. I'm definitely going to be giving more weight to the questions that are related to today's topic. The questions, though, will be answered at the end of the presentation because I'm going to be going full screen for my PowerPoint, and when that happens, I cannot see the chat room at all. Not only that, I'm not very good at multitasking, and so that's that. But if you do have questions at any point in time, put it in the chat room. I am going to be scrolling back to the top of the chat room after the presentation is over, and then going through relevant questions first. So questions that are relevant to today's presentation first. And then if there's any time left, I'll scroll back up to go through any less relevant questions to today's presentation. So we'll do your best to answer all of your questions you guys may have. Just in case you're watching on YouTube, if you want to be a part of this whole chat thing and ask questions and whatnot, head on over to internationaldentistcentral.com/workshop. It's just one word, workshop. If you come on over there, you will actually be able to ask me a question if you do have it. So I'm very curious to know where you are at with things. Are you, and just to gauge so that I can make sure I speak more to you, how many people here have never been to an interview and are waiting? And how many people here have an interview coming up, perhaps, but they've been to one before or something like that? So how many of you are kind of like, well, I need to set up a home lab and are at that stage, versus how many of you have actually had done something in the past and this is not your first time? I would love to know. And I know today's topic is how to get started after you get an interview call, but I actually did make one more presentation that I wanted to share with you, titled Setting Up a Home Lab. And I would love to be able to go through both because setting up a home lab is the very first step to practicing anything, right? Like, what are you going to practice if we don't have a home lab? Some people do practice at, let's say, so the place they're working at, the dental office that they're working at, etc. But most people, even when they have access to that, most people still opt to set up their own home lab because it allows you to practice whenever you want to. And thank you for sharing that you've been invited. You've never been invited. This is my second cycle. So I guess if you do get invited, will be your very first interview, right? Okay. All right. And somebody else has an interview coming. It's your very first ever interview. First cycle, never invited. Okay, so far, the three people that chimed in, it's everybody's first interview if they get called this season. And I don't know if you noticed, there was a Facebook post saying, I got a call. I think that came up yesterday. Right, because today's Indiana's interview. Basically said, oh, I got invited for tomorrow's interview, right? And that person declined because they couldn't travel back in time or something like that. But those things happen. And so you do want to be prepared if you can, even before you have a call, because you just never know how that opportunity will present to you. And you'll most likely, to get accepted, you'll most likely be going through a bench test. So as I said, I have 2 presentations. We'll go through the first one first, and then we'll go through the second one. The second one is setting up a home lab, and the first one is about how to spend your time. I am now going to go full screen and share my screen with you so that you guys can be a part of the the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so how do I do this again? Share screen. Oops, I just went to print. I know there is a where to share it. Here, present. Here. FYI, now I no longer have access to, or I can no longer see the chat room, but I promise I will get back to your questions later. Okay, so got a call, didn't practice yet. What do I do? And I sure hope that all of you here do get a call this season. First, when you get a call, it'll be from a specific school, right? The first question to ask yourself or figure out for yourself is, what do you have to perform at that bench test? Because each school's bench test is different. You may be told ahead of time what it is, or it may actually be a surprise. There are a lot of schools that won't tell you what it is that you'll be doing until it's actually the day of the bench test. But some schools do tell you. And so if you know, lucky you, it's a little bit more straightforward for you in terms of what you have to do. If it's a surprise, you have more to practice. It's a little bit more complicated. But good thing to know is that it's not just you, everybody else interviewing with you. It's also a surprise for them, so it doesn't actually set you back at all because you're all on the same page. So if you do know what exactly you're doing, so easy, right? Just practice those items and focus on those items. That's it. If you know exactly, like if it's a number 19 class 2 and a number 8 PFM, just do that. That's great. The other people that will be interviewing with you will also only be doing those items, meaning you will probably need to perform at a slightly higher standard than if you are going to a school where they don't tell you until the day of. So that's just an FYI. So because it's basically at the end of the day competition, right? Whether you get accepted or not really, or pass the bench test or not really, is going to depend on how you perform in relationship to how everybody else performs. It's not a pass or fail kind of situation. It is, where are you amongst everybody else? So don't let that kind of slow you down in your practice, but it is good to know that, you know, you only have 2 items or so to practice. That's great. If it's a surprise, then the next thing is, do you only have to do preps? And if that's the case, what was asked in the past? Do you also need to do restorations? If so, is it amalgam or composite, or both? Do you have to do wax exercises? Is there anything else? And these things, for the most part, you should be able to figure it out by doing just a search inside Student Doctor Network, Facebook, or just inside Google too. Try to figure out the best you can. If you can't, then, or if you're like going to a newer school that like really didn't tell you much, then you are left in the dark. Right? And we really can't do much about that. It wouldn't hurt to send an email to the school and just be like, hey, I was just wondering if, would you be just doing preps, or if there's any other exercises that would be performed during the bench test. But if you ask something like that, I would always put the next sentence to be something like, I totally understand if you cannot share that information with me. I just thought I'd ask. Something like that. Be more polite. But don't forget the fact that it's really not just you that doesn't know. It is also everybody else. So that's what you should figure out if it is a surprise. The most common scenario in terms of schools' bench tests, 1 cavity, 1 crown. That is the most common situation. The second most common is for there to be 1 amalgam restoration on top of that. Okay. But notice how I didn't mention the tooth number? It really depends. Like, there isn't really a rule for what kind of tooth we're talking here. And then, so if you don't know where you're going and you have to basically practice cavities and crowns, there's so many teeth, right? So like, do you practice on everything? Like, how do you even go about it? Where do you start? For cavity preparations, I highly encourage you to start from lower first molar cavities, MOs. Keep it simple. It's not an easy prep, but it is a big tooth, and it is a tooth that shows your hand skills vividly. It is a large enough size for you to be able to actually focus on something and work through something. And there's a lot to that preparation. So that is where I encourage you to start. For crowns, I encourage you to start from upper first molar full gold crowns. And I'm talking in terms of tabletop practice. Now, if for whatever reason you're skipping tabletop and you're just heading straight to a mounted, I do not recommend this. But if you are doing that for whatever reason, then I would recommend that you work on the lower first molar full gold crowns instead of the upper first molar full gold crowns. We don't want to bring in indirect vision, etc., before necessary. But the thing that I really want to drive home with you in terms of like, oh my God, this is so many teeth, like so many preps, especially crowns, right? There's full gold, there's PFMs, there's all ceramics, and for cavity, and then there are all these teeth like molars and premolars and canines and incisors, there's uppers, there's molars. Like, if I know, I totally get that it can feel very, very overwhelming. Thing you want to remember is the fact that the principles of a preparation, it's always the same, regardless of which tooth you're working on. So the principles of doing a lower molar full gold crown is exactly the same as an upper molar full gold crown. The principles of a crown is the same on or across any tooth, right? And as we go from, let's say, full gold crown to PFM, what would differ is the amount of occlusal reduction and the buccal margin type, and how much buccal surface we reduce to create that margin that is necessary. That's the only thing that changes, but the fact that it needs taper, the fact that it shouldn't have an undercut, the fact that you need to reduce the occlusal surface in a way where you're conserving its natural anatomy, those things don't change. And so if you know how to do a very good molar crown, you can do a pretty decent premolar crown already, even if you don't practice at all. Okay, So it's always going to be your first teeth that require the most practice. Let's say you spent 3 days or 5 days on lower first molar cavity preparations. You're not going to have to spend the same 3 days or 5 days on an upper molar cavity preparation to get to that same level. You're going to spend significantly less because you've worked out the principles of how to do a cavity preparation with that lower first molar. Same with crowns. So instead of spreading out your efforts and trying to tackle all of the teeth at once, simplify it. It's not going to take you very far if you do it that way, because instead of honing your energy and figuring out how to do one thing really well, you're spreading yourself out, and your progress is going to be slower. So, and later I do show you the exact sequence at which I recommend that you practice and progress. But start there. Lower first molar cavity, upper first molar full gold crowns, tabletop. I know, benchtop practice, people don't like to do this. A lot of people do say like, hey, this is like the advice that goes around in our community a lot. The test is mounted, therefore, just practice mounted as much as you can. Why would you do tabletop? That's not what you're tested on. But sometimes benchtop practice is exactly what you need. Just to show you an example of this, I'm going to show you two photos. Which preparation does yours resemble more? Does it resemble what's on the left-hand side, or does it resemble more of what's on the right-hand side? If it resembles what the preps on the left-hand side more than the right-hand side, you do need to practice tabletop first. The thing with this is everybody knows what an ideal preparation should look like in a theoretical term, right? So the operator that did this preparation knows that their isthmus is too wide, knows that things are just off, and they just can't, it's more like they can't figure out why it's keep happening versus they didn't set out to create an isthmus that was 2 millimeters wide, is what I'm saying. But I can tell you very confidently that this operator, whenever they do a cavity preparation, their isthmus is going to end up something closer to 1.5 to 2 millimeters than 1 millimeter. And it's not because they don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They know that very well. It's just that it's not working for them. For whatever reason, whenever they do a prep, the isthmus ends up always wide. Everything is big. It may also be deep. They're going to basically repeat the same mistakes, the same issues over and over and over again. Getting to know how to actually do an ideal prep with your hands, that is something that is totally separate from the theory. That is something that's totally separate with a theory, but it's something that is very important. So another thing I can tell you very confidently is the fact that if you cannot do a very good upper molar full gold crown when you're holding the typodont in your hand, the chances of you doing it when it is mounted is so slim. It is so slim. You're going to feel like you're kind of working blindly. You're going to feel like, I don't even know. I mean, I kind of know what I'm supposed to be doing, but it's really not working for me. There are too many issues and I don't even know where to start fixing what. Each of your preps are going to look very similar to one another, and it's just going to be very confusing. Get that down on a handheld typodont first. That is going to allow you to really learn with your muscles, like, oh, so this is how I do a nice occlusal reduction so that I conserve the occlusal anatomy. Oh, this is how I break the contacts so that I keep the interproximal margins thin. Oh, this is how I do a chamfer so that it's thin and it's well defined at the same time, those kinds of things, you want to realize that first before going in. So after you learn that with a handheld Typodont, now when you mount it, you know what you're going after, and you try to replicate what you've done in a handheld Typodont mounted. But if you go straight mounted, you are basically trying to jump to the top of the ladder from the very bottom. And I know if you got a call and you have 3 weeks or less left, and if you haven't practiced anything, this is a huge stressor, but it's a very necessary step. If you need benchtop practice time, and by the way, the first image, this exact image is where exactly most applicants that join Bench Test Mastery come at approximately this stage of preparation. It is not a good preparation. This is not perfect either, but it is much better, right? So most people that join come at approximately this stage. And so I'm going to guess that most people here are at approximately this stage, because that's where most people are before they get critical feedback and kind of like guided feedback in terms of like how exactly they should be improving their hand skills to get to the next level. So if you have 3 weeks left, give yourself a good 1 week to practice bench top. All practice, just do it bench top, okay? If you have more than 3 weeks left, at least like you can give yourself more time, but approximately a week for at least everything bench top. The second week, you can go bench top and mounted hybrid. And I really mean this. I'm not saying with this, I'm not saying go mounted with a very occasional bench top. No. I'm talking, if anything, 50-50. If not, like if you have more than 3 weeks to practice, I want you to go more like 70-30 or 80-20 even, and spend more time bench top than mounted. And then the last week is when I want you to go mounted, while you still go back to bench top if you need to practice something specific. So as you go mounted, you're going to notice that you are going to take a few steps backwards. Like you practice how to do a really good chamfer on a handheld Typodont first, and then you mount it, and then it suddenly doesn't work because now you're adjusting where you should put your finger rest in a mounted mannequin versus, you know, a handheld Typodont where you could put it wherever you wanted to and like turn the Typodont in the direction you needed it to be. And it was very convenient for you. It's not going to be like that anymore, right? But at least now, that's what you need to figure out is pretty clear. You need to figure out where you're going to sit, where you're going to put your finger rest, and all that kind of stuff. Everything is going to need to be positioned so that you can replicate the results you had when you were practicing bench top. You are going to take several steps backwards. So when you're working hybrid or when you're going totally mounted, if you find yourself making the same mistakes over and over again, bench top, always go back. It's going to do wonders for you, okay? It's very easy to waste teeth. It is so very easy. It only takes a split second. It's so easy to waste teeth and time and get frustrated with this. You always want to go back to the core. It won't take you very long, and you have so much more to gain than to lose by doing it. Cavity preparation practice sequence. Start from lower molar tabletop. Please start from lower molar tabletop. After that, you can go lower molar mounted, okay? And then go upper molar tabletop. I still recommend anytime you practice something brand new, doing it tabletop at least once before going mounted. Sorry. There we go. I recommend that whenever you are introducing something new, to practice it tabletop at least once, or at least until you get a good outline form, and things like that before you go mounted. So you need to figure out what you're supposed to do tabletop and then go mounted. But in terms of tooth sequence, you start from lower molar, and then you move to upper molar, and then you go to upper premolar. Okay, those are the teeth that are most often asked. And then go class 3 if they have a history of it. If the program you're going to has never asked class 3 before, I may not think about this, but if they have, I would put it in. It doesn't take a whole lot of time to practice for it. It's a very, very small prep. Optional is lower premolar. Lower premolar is really not asked very often. It's asked in Indiana, but that's like the only school that has been consistently asking for it. And other than Indiana, schools don't really ask for it very often. So I would focus the efforts on lower molar, upper premolar, and then you can try a few lower premolars, like just in case. They may throw a curveball at you. That does happen, right? But yeah, otherwise I wouldn't worry about spending a lot of time in lower premolars. Let's just put it that way. So that is how I want you to practice cavity preparations. And yes, there are MOs, there are DOs. Upper molars have this oblique ridge issue where does it cross the oblique ridge? Does it not cross the oblique ridge? Those kinds of design variations come in, right? I wouldn't worry about those in the beginning of the, I would put them in perhaps here. After upper premolar, before class 3, I would practice a few variations. But remember, not everything takes an equal amount of time. This is not like, oh, 3 days this, 3 days this, 3 days, 3 days, 3 days, 3 days. It is like probably a whole week this. You really learn how to make an isthmus only at 1 millimeter without going wide with this. You really figure out how to break contacts, and how to create boxes with just the right amount of contacts, broken, buccal, lingual, and gingival with this, and then you can do it anywhere else. So the longest amount of time is going to be spent on lower first molar. And then design variations, if you know how to do it on an MO, a DO is just a swap, right? Like it's a distal box instead of an mesial box. And so you could spend just like 1 day going through all the design variations of upper and lower molars, and then you'd be set. So it is not, because it's written out in a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sequence, it doesn't mean it's not at all. It does not carry the same amount of weight at all. I just want to make that super clear for you. Crown preparation sequence. Before I go this, actually, let me swap. Let's do this first. The guideline, the general guideline is do molars first. Do molars before going to premolars, canines, or centrals. Practice chamfers before practicing shoulders. That means you need to practice full gold crowns first. The only teeth that you need to practice full gold crowns is molars. You're not going to be asked to do a premolar full gold crown because nobody does full gold crowns on premolars. It will look awful, right? So practice molar full gold crowns first. That's where it comes from. And remember, molars first, chamfers before shoulders. Don't go straight to a molar PFM even. You need to learn first how to do a good chamfer. And when you practice that, you're not only learning how to do a good chamfer, you're also learning how to reduce your walls straight instead of like without creating an undercut, without curving them, things like that, which are mistakes that people make a lot when they first start to practice. So just because I say chamfer before shoulder, like you're not just practicing chamfers, you're always practicing axial reduction as well. And the axial reduction is the same whether it's a chamfer or a shoulder, right? And so you're practicing most of it with the chamfer, and then as you move on to a shoulder, you're widening, you're increasing the amount of axial reduction you're doing while you're creating a different type of margin. With that in mind, your practice sequence. Start tabletop and start from upper molar full gold crown. And the reason I say upper molar instead of lower molar is because lower molars have a lingual tilt that makes it a little bit more difficult. And upper molars are, it's pretty vertical, the long axis, and so it is a little bit more straightforward to practice first. The reason I did not start from upper molar for a cavity preparation, though, even though it has the same lingual tilt, is because the upper molar, most classical design, keeps the oblique ridge intact, basically making us having to do two separate small preparations instead of one large one. But when you're first starting out cavity preparations, you do want to do a bigger preparation in which you need to keep things like anatomical structures balanced. You have two isthmuses to deal with instead of one. It actually makes it a lot more challenging to do so. So it makes sense for cavities to start from lower molars, but for crowns, tabletop, upper molar, full gold crown is the way to go. And then you can move on to lower molar full gold crowns. And you notice that I only signified tabletop on number 1 and number 2. I do want to make sure that you really, really, really honor those two, as I know everybody's anxious when they're practicing for a bench test. So yeah, the rest of it, I just laid out kind of the sequence in how to approach it. But as I said before, whenever you do something brand new to you, do the first one tabletop. It's going to serve you well. Okay, so after you go through upper and lower molar full gold crowns, now you can do PFMs. Two differences there is the amount of occlusal reduction and the type and width of margin on the buccal side, but it's not that big of a difference. Okay. After that, move on to central incisor. Central incisor is challenging, and a lot of people stumble on this, and it takes a while to really get what this prep is supposed to look like. So I definitely do not recommend starting it any earlier than after you've worked through upper lower molar PFMs. Yeah, but I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up so that you know it'll be a challenging tooth to do. So you want to do PFMs in all ceramics. In all tooth, the difference between PFM and all ceramic also is very minute. It is just the fact that for all ceramics, you have to give a shoulder all the way around instead of keeping a chamfer on the lingual, okay? That's the only difference. Even the occlusal reduction amount stays the same for PFM versus all ceramic. Yeah, but I did want to just kind of throw that in there because schools do ask for all ceramics sometimes. So you start practicing central incisors. As you start bringing in central incisors, you can slowly also start bringing in upper premolars. Upper premolars are probably going to be a little easier than central incisors, but still I asked you to start practicing central incisors first, just because it takes a longer time to become more decent at it than a premolar would. And people do stumble on this a lot. And if you are starting this practice too close to your test day, you're probably going to panic quite a bit. And I don't want you to do that. So introduce it to your practice regime a little earlier than later. Okay, so central incisor, then upper premolar crowns, PFMs and all ceramics. And then comes upper and lower canines. Lower premolar, extremely optional. To the best of my knowledge, nobody has asked this before. If they do ask it, it's going to be a tiny tooth, and it's going to be very, very, very similar to what upper premolar looks like. So I wouldn't worry about it, honestly, but I threw it in there just in case you're wondering why I don't mention it. It's completely optional. Can somebody ask it? Of course. at any time. It's so easy to change, you know, what they're going to ask for you on the test day. They can change or even come up with it like the moment they're about to give the test, right? So yeah, keep that in mind. But I definitely wouldn't spend a lot of time on it. And I would not do canines until first doing centrals and premolars first. It's kind of like a hybrid design between the two, and doing those both before is going to help with that a lot. But just like with cavity preparations, you're going to spend the most time with the molars and maybe even up to the central. But premolar is kind of like an upper molar, well, it really is like an upper molar crown cut in half in a buccolingual direction. So it's not like, if you know how to do a good crown on a molar, you can do a pretty decent crown on a premolar even if you had never done one before. So the amount of time you're going to spend on it to bring the preps up to the same kind of level is going to significantly decrease as you go down this list. Okay, and canines are asked, they're asked a little bit less, but I mean, they're asked frequently enough for me to strongly recommend practicing it if you are going to a program that doesn't tell you what you're going to be tested on before. But don't panic. Just remember molar first, chamfer before shoulder, and tell yourself like, okay, if I can do a really good crown on this tooth, the same principles apply on that other tooth. A crown is a crown is a crown. It has the exact same objective of basically creating space so that the lab can create a crown extraorally that will, when cemented onto the patient's mouth, restore its original form. Right? And so, and it uses the same kind of material. If it's just, let's just say it's a PFM, it uses the exact same structural material for molar versus a premolar versus a central. And so the amount of reduction that needs to be done, etc., is the same. So the principles apply, which is why it's very important for you to remember the principles and not to forget them. So the principles are exactly the same regardless. Cavities also, like if you're going to restore something with amalgam, doing so inside a molar versus premolar makes zero difference. Just don't forget the principles. If you keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again, do that part tabletop. Okay, just take it out. You may have even like started your preparation on a mounted type Brant. But if you find that like, oh, always when I do this part, it's really hard for me, take it out and try a tabletop and figure out, like try to get to the root of the cause instead of just wondering, I wonder why it always happens. Oh no, it happened again. Like it's really not going to take you very far, right? You have to have a very inquiring mind. Why? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? Why did that happen? If you're not sure while you're prepping, if you're not confident that your burr is producing the exact results you wanted to produce for you, stop your handpiece there and then. Stop, pick up your mirror and explore and observe, okay? It only takes a split second to overreduce something. You don't get to build it back. Once the tooth structure is gone, that part is gone. We can't bring it back. So stop liberally, okay? Most people, when I ask them, do they stop often or do they wish whatever they're doing is ideal and keep on going? They're usually embarrassed and they say, oh, I kind of wish, but I still keep going. Don't do that. Whether it's cavities or crowns, there are many, many, many. It has a long list of criteria it need to meet to become ideal, right? Don't try to work on everything at once. It is too much and you will lose your focus in terms of what is important. Choose one, maximum three, like this is real maximum, 3 aspects at a time to work on and just focus on those for the prep. And when you choose those aspects, make sure that, at least in the beginning, they are aspects that make the preparation clinically acceptable instead of ideal. And this is what I mean by this. Let's say we're working on a crown preparation. Most people, when they start, they're very, very focused on making a good occlusal reduction so that the anatomy is preserved. What people focus on less oftentimes is making sure that there is enough occlusal clearance. But what good does a crown preparation do if you don't have sufficient occlusal clearance? That beautiful anatomy you created, completely worthless. Yeah. You need to first make sure you give enough room for the lab to make that crown for you. Like there needs to be, whether it's full gold or a PFM, there needs to be enough room for whatever material you're choosing to put there. So when you're choosing those 1 to 3 aspects to work on, you want to make sure that you're not choosing occlusal anatomy, but instead you're choosing occlusal clearance first. And then after the occlusal clearance comes as second nature to you, that's when you hone in the occlusal anatomy, because a preparation can never be ideal if it is not clinically acceptable first. Okay, so always ask yourself, okay, for a crown, for this preparation to be clinically acceptable, what does it need? And for crowns, that is occlusal clearance and convergence as the most core qualities that you should focus on. And for cavities, it is, well, the area that I actually make people focus on first is convergence and their hand skills itself, so that they can keep a isthmus a millimeter when they want to, instead of like somehow having to widen it, you know. Just try to do a little bit better with each preparation. That's what it takes. Never practice blindly. It's so easy to spend time going through a huge quantity of teeth with little improvement. Don't do that. Be clear on what aspect you're trying to improve on with this tooth right now, and keep that at the forefront of your mind when you do the prep. And then evaluate, like, okay, how did I do this tooth compared to the last tooth? Did I actually like achieve what I wanted to do? Be critical and be strategic when you're practicing. Don't just practice. Okay. Sometimes you need to practice for amalgam restorations. I didn't really want to go through like all the equipment you need and things like that inside this presentation, but amalgam restorations, I just made this simple slide because it requires a lot of things. And the biggest ticket item purchase is always going to be the amalgamator, right? And it's a pretty big deal. I mean, like it's like they don't come cheap. You need to buy an entire thing that will, it's like a sizable machine, and then capsules to go along with it. And so it's a sizable investment, and some people choose to do it and some people don't. If you don't want to do it, you can practice carving with wax. You can only practice carving with wax though, right? Like you can't really like do other stuff, but the rest of the things you can kind of look up on videos on how to use an amalgamator, or they will explain it for you on the test day. So like it's not that difficult to do so. I just wanted to bring that up so that you knew your options in terms of that. Restorations, the objective of the restoration is always going to be to restore the tooth's original shape, but with a simplified anatomy. We're never trying to restore all of the accessory grooves and secondary grooves, all that kind of stuff. Like, no, it is, we simplify the anatomy and we restore the tooth's original shape so that it functions well. The areas to focus on is restoring contacts and harmonizing with adjacent teeth. And I say this because most people, when they start practicing, they focus again on carving out the grooves. But that's just one part of it, and it is less important. Exactly the same goes for wax up. objective is to restore the tooth's original shape and anatomy. Here I said anatomy, not simplify the anatomy because it is a wax up. But again, you must restore contacts and harmonize with adjacent teeth. So with both, I want you to focus more on these things. Cusp-tip heights, mostly this cusp-tip heights only applies to wax ups, but central groove heights and marginal ridge height applies to both. The adjacent teeth contact in its location. And these things are what largely make up like being in harmony with the adjacent teeth, right? Also the occlusal table size, the cervical ridge, and things like that. Focus less on creating the perfect occlusal anatomy, okay? There's so much more to restorations, wax exercises, wax ups, etc., than to create the perfect occlusal anatomy. If your marginal ridge height is like a millimeter higher on your restoration, but you have the perfect occlusal anatomy, it's not good. It's kind of like that same analogy of, oh, you need to first make sure that you have good occlusal clearance before we're trying to create good occlusal anatomy. It's like of no use. Like that marginal ridge, that's this restoration that you do. If you create a perfect anatomy in terms of like groove carvings, but your marginal ridge height is higher, that marginal ridge is going to get chipped off, and that entire restoration is going to have to be redone again. So again, it's more the very first focus needs to be on being clinically acceptable over being ideal. Okay. If you have to practice not just preps, but other stuff too, I know this can also feel very overwhelming. Spend 80% of your time on preparations, okay? 80% or more, I'm gonna say, on preparations over restorations and wax. If you are somebody that practiced before, either you took a bench test before or to whatever capacity you have practiced before, the very first step in terms of what you should do is evaluate where you are. Where are your current hand skills? Where do you stand in relationship to everybody else? So start from the first items that I mentioned in terms of like how to go about practicing. So your lower first molar cavities and your molar or your upper molar full gold crowns. If they're good, then go through that practice sequence and move to the next step. But if they need practice, you stop right there and get that up to par and get that going first, okay? To make the most out of your time left, and wow, the presentation has definitely taken longer than I had expected it to, but for those who can stick around, we will go through one more presentation explaining how to set up your home lab. So if you have time, stick around. If you need to set up your home lab and you're wondering stuff, stick around. But in either case, how do you make the most out of the time left? Get started now, okay? I know you may not even have a call, but I have never, ever, ever heard anybody regret having practiced for too long. Even if you don't get a call, the practice you do, it stays with you. You're not giving it away to anybody else. And when you do get a call next time, even if it's next year, you're not starting from ground zero. It takes longer than a few days to get ready, okay? It takes more than a boot camp style 5-day course for you to actually be bench test ready. And I am saying this from somebody that I have run those before. That is why we stopped running them, because I realized that it takes a longer time than the interaction of a few days to get somebody really ready. Like, so do it, like start now. Getting accurate feedback on your work is so important. It is so important. you don't want to waste time, effort, and a lot of teeth, right? And oh my gosh, you will go through a lot of teeth. But as I said before, this is what I was talking about in terms of like strategizing with your practice. It is very easy to fall into the rabbit hole of just mindlessly practicing, and it's not going to take you anywhere. I've actually done this the first year. I don't know how many of you know my story, but I've had to go through the application cycle twice. And the first time I was invited to one school that had a bench test, and I had no idea what to do or how to go about practicing for the bench test. My hand skills were not good at that time. My hand skills improved when I was practicing the second time, because I became much more strategic with what I was doing. But the first time I was just like, oh, I guess I'll try to figure it out and like do it on my own. I just bought a bunch of teeth and I really mindlessly practiced. I somehow thought that that would improve my hand skills. I wish somebody had told me otherwise. There was nobody. There weren't any workshops like this at that time. So I had no idea. But I really did waste a year. And I do believe that if I had performed well at that bench test, I would have finished my program a year earlier. Of course, it wouldn't have been from where I went to, but honestly, all I wanted at the time was one acceptance, right? And so even though I had that opportunity, I wasted it because I wasn't strategic. I didn't get any feedback. I was very just mindless and blindly doing it like the way I thought I thought that I was doing it the right way, but what do I know? I had never done it before. So accurate feedback, please get it. And yes, a lot of people ask, does bench test mastery include feedbacks? And yeah, it does for an entire year. We don't have a limit of number of teeth for that duration. You can send me something every single day for a whole entire year. That's part of what makes bench test mastery very, very, very special. You can find the link to bench test mastery if you want more information on it down below. If you happen to have joined the workshop very early, refresh your page. You may not see it right now, but if you refresh your page, you should see the link down there right now. Also, if you want to ask me any questions about it, also there is a way to request to chat with me about bench test mastery underneath this video. So you can go there and do that. But the way the personalized feedbacks work is basically you'll take photos of your work, and we have very detailed guidelines of how to take photos so that it most accurately represents the preparation that you've done. And because I tell you inside the course exactly which burrs to use, I know what burrs you're using. And so when I see your work, all a preparation is a trail that a burr has left behind. And so I know the shape of your burr you're using, or exactly which burr you're using. And so when I see the trail, I know how it got there. It tells me a lot. Like, it has a story. Each prep has a story. And because I've looked at so many preps, I can decipher the story pretty easily. So, okay, so that is the end of this presentation. And let's talk about how to set up your home lab. You know what? Let me stop sharing for a minute and jump into your questions. If there is any, I'm not even sure. Let's see. The diamond burr and carbide burr for crowns. Think about this. The objective of a crown preparation is like, it serves a purpose, right? The purpose is for us to be able to cement a crown there after we're done. So no, you do not want to finish it. You do not want the surfaces of the crown to be smooth. It should be rough with burr strikes on it, because that helps the cementation be a lot stronger. If you polish off a crown surface, you're making a slippery slope. And as you know, cement relies on mechanical retention more than anything else. And so you're getting rid of that. So you don't want to do it. What do you suggest to us to practice while we're waiting for an interview call? Start exactly there. Lower first molar, cavity preparations, upper first molar, crown preparations. That practice sequence that I showed you earlier, that is exactly the sequence I want you to go through, starting tabletop. And if you don't have an interview coming up, that means that you have so much more time to put into tabletop practice. And that is very important. That means a lot. Like, you will, like, giving yourself more time to go through each step is incredibly beneficial for you. So that sequence holds. In terms of how to go about it. And then when you get a call, and let's just say that for somewhat of whatever reason, we know that that school that called you is going to ask for a upper premolar, DO, and a lower canine crown. And in the sequence, you haven't, like, you didn't reach that point yet. It doesn't matter. Now you can skip all the rest. You've practiced how to do good crowns already. So those principles you can apply to that lower, I said lower canine, right? Lower canine crown, and the crown, the cavity you've practiced, even if it was different teeth, the principle carry, and so you can just practice upper premolar. You're going to be at such a better place than you would have been otherwise. If that you're going to be at so much farther ahead than if you had waited until you got an interview call and then you just started to practice those two preps. Bench top. What is bench top? It just means practicing with typodont held in your hand rather than mounted in a typodont. So now let's go through setting up a home lab. Setting up a home lab. Here we go. Oops. Present. I always have to go through this one wrong click to get to where I want to go. So if you can stick around, stick around. I believe whatever we have gone through the promised topic, but I was so inspired when I was preparing this earlier that I decided to do two instead of one. So how do you set up a home lab so that you can practice preparations at home? So you need a lot of stuff. Here's your overview. You need an air compressor, a turbine unit. You need to connect the turbine to the connector and set up the entire turbine. You need a high-speed handpiece, typodont and extra teeth, mounting pole, a cheek cover, lights, dental instruments, and burrs, and we'll go through each one in more detail. Compressor and dental turbine. Okay, you can see a compressor to the left, a turbine to your right. Compressor. This is just a brand that I like. You do not have to use this at all, but I do want you to make sure that you use one that says it is quiet. A silent air compressor, a quiet air compressor. It may say different things. Please get that. Even those are very, very, very noisy. And if you buy one that doesn't say silent or quiet, it will be really noisy. It'll be kind of like unbearably noisy. So don't do that to yourself, okay? In terms of the size, I don't quite recommend, okay, so obviously the larger the capacity, the more expensive it is. You really don't need to go over like 5 gallons or so, but I don't recommend that you go so small as to 1 gallon. when you practice with something like 1 gallon, you may end up using the air faster than the compressor can fill up itself with, which means that there'll be times where your handpiece just stops and you have to wait for your compressor to run, and so that it has enough air to send to your handpiece again. So at the minimum, get something that's like 3 gallons or so, and please make sure you get a quiet one. Turbine unit to your right, there isn't like a specific brand or anything like that. They look something like this. Some are metal enclosed. They're pretty much the same thing. Don't worry about it too much. They all come from the same few Chinese factories, and they'll get the job done, okay? Now, setting up the turbine unit, though, is something else. How do you set it up? You need these things to do it, and I'm going to actually show you. I'll walk you through what exactly this looks like right here. Just give me a minute. You need to purchase 3 more things to get that going. First of all, when you get your compressor or your turbine unit, sorry, you're going to notice that the turbine unit, this blue tube is not hooked up. So you're going to get like an empty blue tube, and you have to hook it up. So you unscrew this little part at the end of the turbine unit, and you put it through this blue tube, and then you squeeze the blue tube in there, and then you basically screw this back on. That's how you do that on the turbine side of things. Then that's done. But the more challenging thing comes in when you have to hook up your compressor to the turbine, because a turbine unit is not going to come with the necessary parts. It's just going to come with a blue tube that is like free-ended, okay? So you need 3 parts. First, it's called the brass hose barb. You can get it like at a Home Depot. You can also purchase it online. Like, we have links to this if you need it. I'll just put it inside our webinar chat room after this. But but basically these are the dimensions, and I've written it out in the PowerPoint as well. But it looks like this. So this end goes into the blue tube. Okay, you like squeeze it in. So yeah, this is the part that hooks into the blue tube, basically the turbine. And then you need another side, something that will hook onto here so that you can hook it onto the compressor. I know this can sound a little confusing, but just buy this, a 1/4-inch industrial steel plug. Get this, these are all going to be like less than $3 a pop or something like that. They're not expensive at all. But this, if you go to Home Depot, you're gonna find this at a next to where the compressors are, compressors and like accessory for compressors. So it's gonna be right there. So just make sure you get your dimensions right. And to connect this to this, it is much better if you use Teflon tape. If you don't, you're going to have a bunch of air leaking, and it sounds like bad and things like Teflon tape. You see this price, $1.27. Just get it. And you're going to put Teflon tape, it's right here. You can't really see it well, right? But this is after it has been assembled. So you're going to basically take off some Teflon tape and put it across here. Just going to, oh, sorry, here. So just, it's kind of like Scotch tape, but it's not like Scotch tape, but you would do it the same way if you were to tape it, okay? You're gonna just put it across, that's it. And then you just screw this and this together at this end, and this end is what goes into the air compressor, okay? So after you assemble this unit, now you're going to put in this into the blue tube, and this is just, it's a quick release. It's very easy to get it in and out, but here it is of the air compressor. And now you are ready with that. Okay, so I know this might have been a little technical and complicated, but just write these down if you need to, and just bring it to Home Depot and ask them to find it for you or something like that. High-speed handpiece is next. Price range $10 to $1,000. I mean, really, like, the price range is so big. Some people really worry, like, oh, what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to get it from? Thing with purchasing dental related things while in the US from, let's say, legitimate sources is not the easiest thing without a dental license number. Most dental vendors, let's say, that work with actual like dental offices and stuff, to even purchase something from them, you have to like open an account and they will ask for your dental license number. Basically meaning if you don't have a dental license number, you can't even open an account. It makes things very, very complicated. So usually we have to turn online, right? Chinese knockoffs, so prevalent, and they will say made in Japan, made in Germany, and they will have a brand name on it, even though it is completely false, okay? The reason I'm telling you this here is because I have seen people spend $500 on a knockoff, and the exact same knockoff was also being sold for $15 on the internet. So somebody made a really, really hefty bit of chunk of money by, you know, basically branding it and taking better photos than the more shadier dealers. And well, this person was more shady, I guess, but they did that, and they basically sold something that this person could have gotten for $15 for $500. And so when this person was making that $500 purchase, they were really thinking that they were making a decent purchase and making an investment in it for something that was decent. So this is difficult. So you have a few options. First option, which most people just end up doing it this way, just buy 10 cheap handpieces, $10 each, spend $100, expect them to break, and they will break, but just toss it out when they break. Still, you've only spent $100 instead of $500 or $1,000, right? That's option number one. Option number two, if you want a more decent one, then you can purchase a refurbished or a broken handpiece online, and you can, if you just buy a refurbished one, it should be ready to go. Like, there are people on eBay, by the way, that sell refurbished handpieces. It's going to be a little bit more money, yes, but I trust those much more over the made in Germany $500 ones that I really cannot verify who is selling them, because it is much more honest. It is saying like, look, I fixed this, right? Instead of saying like, oh, this is brand new. So yeah, get something refurbished, or you can just buy something broken for parts, and then you can find, just Google in your local, somebody that does handpiece repairs. These people often have like vans that they drive around, and they'll visit like dental offices, and they will fix handpieces inside the vans. So find somebody like that and have them fix it for you. That will probably set you back $300 or so. Yeah. So those are your options. There really isn't like a right or wrong option to go about it at all. But I do want to make sure that you purchase a 4-hole handpiece, not a 2-hole. Okay. Do not go the route of purchasing a 2-hole handpiece plus an adapter either. No, buy a 4-hole handpiece. Even if you have one that you use from your home country, the usability, the 4-hole handpiece runs so much smoother than a 2-hole. There's like no comparison. Your work is going to turn out much rougher with a 2-hole. Don't do it, okay? Just go get a 4-hole handpiece. Type 1 aunts. Main brands are Kilgore and Columbia. Price range, I said 200 to 300. It's more like 180 to 300. Just like handpieces, typodonts also are going through this really severe wave of counterfeit fake items. So if you're going to purchase them new, please do so directly from Kilgore or Columbia's website. If you're going to get them used, you can get them off eBay or somebody selling off of Facebook. That's fine. But do not buy new ones from eBay. Please do not buy new ones from eBay. I only hear horror stories from this. Teeth are different, anatomy is different, genuine teeth will not fit in there, etc. Do not do it, okay? Teeth are not interchangeable between Kilgore and Columbia, unfortunately. So if you have, let's say, a Kilgore and you're going to a school that tests you on Columbia, yeah, you should probably buy a Columbia. In that case, I probably would look into buying something used, but I know it's more expensive, but I do have a pretty strong preference for a new typodont over a used one. Unless you're sure that it was very gently used, because typodonts can come in such a mess of a condition. Teeth all ruined, occlusion all off, teeth all like mounted. So like first premolars screwed into second premolar positions sometimes. The structure inside where basically the alveolar bone is like kind of broken, but you can't really see that from the outside. So when you screw in teeth, the contacts are all off. So like a lot can happen to a typodont. So, and this is why I do have a strong preference for new over used, at least for your first main practice one. And then like if you practice, let's say with Columbia first, and then you have to just practice a little bit to get used to a Kilgore typodont before you go to a school, for instance, then yeah, like just get it used at that point. But for the majority of the practice, I definitely recommend new. And you want to get ones with third molars present, because second molars can also be asked, right? And if a second molar is asked, the distal contact, you're going to have to work with that, especially if it's like either it's a crown or a DO on a second molar. And you can't really practice that without a third molar. It's so much more posterior than what you would experience with the first molar. You're going to get thrown off on your test day, so don't do that. How many teeth should I buy is a question I get all the time, and I cannot answer this question because it really depends on the person. I have seen some people work through 30 teeth in a day, and that person was extreme. And then I have seen people work through 3 to 4 teeth a day. So that big range, it's basically, I just gave you a 10x range, 3 to 30. I don't know where you are going to be in that spectrum. It depends on a lot of things. Some people are much more faster in each prep, and just like they move through preps really, really quickly, and they ruin a tooth like within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and like move on to the next one. Some people are much more slower and deliberate in their practice and approach, and therefore they go slower. And I'm not sure where you are in that spectrum. I do prefer that you would work more slower and deliberately, because going through a lot of teeth is not going to be the ticket to improving. It is going to be to strategically practicing like a few things at a time, and just making sure that this prep is just a little bit better than the last prep, etc. If you're gonna go that route, I would plan, I mean, it also depends on how much time you're gonna be spending practicing every day, but I would plan on at least 5 teeth a day. And then you can like figure out like how you want that distributed in terms of like tooth number and stuff like that. But molars and upper incisors are what people need the most of usually, upper and lower. And when I say the most of, I mean like 5x more, 5 times more than other teeth. Mounting pole, you can get this on eBay. $50 to $60. This is actually from a guy that makes this contraption and highly popularized it, and it works just fine. The shipping is probably going to come from somewhere in Arizona, I believe. Just get that. Just search for dental mounting pole inside eBay, and get that. It's fine. Just I do want you to know that you need to mount it lower than what you'd think. So a tabletop mount is actually very high. You want something more. You want a table leg mount so that you can be a little higher than a coffee table, but lower than a tabletop, even unless you're like a really, really tall guy. Yeah. Oral cavity cover. Get them from Kilgore, regardless of whether you're using a Kilgore or a Typodont. This is not Typodont brand specific at all, okay? Kilgore, the reason I say it is because it's pretty cheap. It's 50 bucks and it's good quality. I have tried using other ones because I'm curious about this kind of stuff. So I had purchased random ones before, and the issue was the fact that the cheeks were not flexible enough to even allow the Typodont to open. And what are you going to do, right? Like, it's so frustrating. It's like the cheeks, the material, whatever it was made out of, wouldn't allow the cheeks to stretch. And this, the one from Kilgore used, it's very good. So this is the only reason I'm saying just go get this, because I can tell you that it will work for you, even if you're using Columbia. If you're using Columbia, the only thing that you will not be using are the screws that come with the oral cavity cover, which you do not need to use. You can just use the original screws that are on your Typodont currently. Even if you're using a Kilgore, you would actually only switch over to the screws that come with the oral cavity cover if you're practicing with water for whatever reason, and most people don't need to practice with water. So either way, you're going to be sticking with your original screws. A fancier option. This is a fancier option. If you want a whole head, everything set up like this, it's going to cost you about $1,000. And to do this, you are not going to be using that mounting pole I showed you earlier, because that mounting pole is not sturdy enough to be holding this big head. It's very heavy. Most candidates do not practice with this. I just wanted to show you that you do have the option for that if you so chose to do so and wanted to do that, but you're gonna purchase everything starting from a mounting pole ground up. Lighting. This is what I like a lot. Practicing preps at home, the lighting is going to be very different from your test day or doing it at a dental office, because inside there, the lights have its own system, the mirroring system inside it, so that to minimize shadowing, right? And when you practice at home, we have straightforward lights like that don't have those fancy things inside it. Therefore, it's very easy, especially so when you're practicing tabletop, it's very easy to just move the light from one direction to another. But when you're not practicing tabletop, it's difficult. So in a mounted Typodont, it's very easy to create a shadow with your own hand and your handpiece, and you like suddenly everything to go dark. So get 2 or 3 of these lamps from IKEA. They're only 10 bucks each, and shine them from different directions. And that way, even if you are covering with your hands one light source, you have other light sources to support you through. Then comes dental instruments. You need a mirror, Explorer / Probe. You can get 2 separate ones, or sometimes they come where one end is an Explorer and another end is a Probe. Make sure your probe has marks every millimeter, not every 3 millimeters. And then comes hand instruments, hand cutting instruments. Mirror and Explorer, quite honestly, you can go really cheap on them. You can find really cheap ones from eBay, not a problem. The Explorer can blunt, and actually the end can bend easily, so that's not that great. So just be careful with that. Like, don't let it like bump into a ton of stuff. But hand cutting instruments, you should not be going cheap with this. okay? This is a brand that I found that works well. It works well because it is not as expensive as most other name brands are, and it's very, very good quality. So in terms of price and quality, they're really good. So I know this is a brand they probably never heard of, but MyDentalUSA.com, we're not affiliated with them at all. I just really like it. I just like them a lot. And to start out with, you need hatchet number 8 and 9, mesial and distal margin trimmers at the minimum. Burrs. For a cavity preparation, simple 3, 330, 245, 56. That's really all you need. For a crown, 556, 856 series in 0120 and 4016s. These are your chamfer burrs, and 856012 is what you can use for interproximal reduction. You can also just purchase other needle burrs as well. That will also be fine. And then 847 KR016 is for your shoulder, and then an egg-shaped burr for your anteriors, right? 556 is for your posterior occlusal reduction. And these two burrs are not the same. The dimensions are the same. They cut and act extremely differently, so they are not interchangeable. Purchase both, please. Okay. So that's all in terms of that. I just wanted to remind you that if you want to work with us through our online bench test course, starting now, before you have your interview call, I would highly recommend come on over to internationaldentistcentral.com/bench test mastery. You can also find the link underneath here, okay? Okay, so I went about 30 minutes over. Everybody that is sticking around, I'm actually impressed. Seems like almost everybody is sticking around. Everybody is sticking around, which is great. Okay, so hope you found this helpful, really. Somebody asked about an electric handpiece, how to set it up. Set that up, and all it needs is electricity. It's going to be more expensive, and that's fine. Colorado uses an electric handpiece. As far as I know, that's the only school that you'll actually have to use it. It's bigger and heavier, so it's going to be more difficult to practice with. But yeah, you can just do it like that. Which handpiece is the best? I believe I kind of explained to you the conundrum of a handpiece. Therefore, I really do not have a preference in terms of this. And you asked how much can we invest on it. I'm not exactly sure about what you mean by it, but in case you're asking about our Bench Test Mastery course, the investment is $997. You stay a member until you get accepted. So we want it to be now and this year, but just in case it doesn't work out that way, you will stay a member until you get accepted, even if it is 2 years from now, 3 years from now. But let's try to get you in this year. The only thing is feedbacks is for 1 year since you start using it. So it's 1 year from the day you start, you send me your first work for feedback. Very important to get accurate feedback. I cannot stress that enough. I think that's why I basically wasted a year, and I wish I hadn't done that, but oh well. Right? And so you don't have to repeat the mistake that I have made. Somebody asked if you can use a matrix band. Yeah, most schools will allow for a matrix band. I don't really recommend using matrix bands for preps if you can avoid it, because it can get complicated. Like, you need to hold a matrix band in place, you need to hold a mirror and all that kind of stuff. You want to train your hands ideally so that you can do the preps without a matrix band. And if you start working on it now, I believe you can get there. Okay, this is all I have for you today. Somebody's asking if I can repeat turbine unit parts. I'm going to drop that. inside the, I dropped that link to what I shared when I shared my screen with you on how to connect it inside the chat room, so you can find it right there. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, and I really appreciate your spending an entire hour and a half. Very impressed at your stamina. This is great. And have a great rest of your evening. Really appreciate your time, and we will have another workshop next week. So make sure you are on our mailing list so that you get a notification for it. So underneath, you can find a way to put in your email address so that you stay in the loop. And that's it. Looking forward to working with anybody that is interested in working with me, and have a fantastic evening. Bye now.